Next up, we're going to hear from American Pacific Borate and Lithium to tell you more about the borate market and a little bit of lithium on the side. We have Anthony Hall, their Executive Director. Anthony.
Fantastic. Good afternoon, everybody. I think that over the last couple of months, I think we've realised that what we probably need to do when we're talking to people is start by giving people an understanding of what borates are. For us, we're unashamedly targeting to be the #3 borate producer globally. So we want to be a significant borate producer. But what does that mean? So borates attach themselves quite interestingly to the clean technology thematic, to the electric vehicle thematic, and to the food security thematic. The major uses for borates globally are in fiberglass, are in ceramics, and in fertilisers. So believe it or not, every electric vehicle has boric acid in it. You need boric acid in the magnets to drive an electric vehicle. Every wind turbine has borates. Every solar PV module has borates in it. You need borates to strengthen the glass. Your smartphone has borates. Energy efficiency, fiberglass insulation in North America is borates. Fertilisers. Boron is the #6 nutrient globally that's applied to soils, especially in North America. So you've got your nitrogen, your phosphates, your potassiums, then your sulphurs. #6 is boron. Okay? Globally, the borate market is dominated by two majors. The Turkish government control about 60% of the borate market, and Rio Tinto control 20% of the borate market. For those of you that know people from Rio Tinto generally regard their borate business as one of their prized businesses. And that's purely because the margins are so high, given it's a duopoly business, attaching to about a 4 million tonne a year boric acid equivalent market. When you look at borates, importantly, generally speaking, borates either come from what's called a sodium borate, being a tin calibre borax, which is predominantly Rio Tinto's operations, or it comes from a calcium borate, being a colemanite, which is predominantly the Turkish operations. 20% comes out of brines globally as byproducts from lithium or potash production. We have a colemanite deposit which is consistent with what the Turkish government has in 3 of their 4 major deposits. So for us, what we're here to talk to you about today is a borate project like no other globally. We're actually unique, which is one of the challenges that we've been having. But we actually have a project with low technical risk purely because it's a colemanite project that's consistent with what the Turkish government convert to boric acid on a daily basis. For me, having come from a potash world where you actually generally have fairly high capex and projects are pretty challenging, I generally look at 3 things before I get involved in a project. The first thing I look for is capex. I want to see low capex. The second thing I look for is margin. I want to see a business with high margin. The third thing I look for is low technical risk. I want to see something that's happened before. If it's never happened before and you're proposing to take it out of the lab into the real world, good luck. I worked in venture capital for 5 years looking at technologies out of the lab into the real world, and I don't want to be involved with them. The fourth thing I think is critical for a project to be successful is an EBITDA, visible EBITDA of over $100 million. If you can't get to over $100 million, you're not going to ever get the liquidity in the market to have a meaningful monetization or liquidity event. So for me, I want to see low capex, because capex ultimately goes to dilution and it goes to fundability and it goes to share price. Let's be very clear, we're all here to maximise share price, as long as we do it ethically. So I want to see low capex, high margin, low technical risk, and I want to see an EBITDA profile of at least $100 million. I'm now going to introduce you to American Pacific Borate and Lithium. We're looking at developing our borate asset in California. Importantly, California currently hosts 2 borate mines. Boron, which is where Rio Tinto produce 20% of the world's borates from, and the Searles Valley operation is currently owned by the Indian conglomerate Nirma, and Nirma produce detergents and use the borates into the detergent market. What you find globally is there's not a lot of borate deposits. To find a borate deposit, you generally need a playa lake or an evaporitic system that has got volcanic activity. It needs the volcanic activity to have deposited the borons, the lithiums and the strontiums. So these deposits are very rare. So from our perspective, we get the San Andreas fault system and we get the playa lake systems that you see in that desert area of Death Valley and California. In Turkey, you get the same type of system. And in the lithium triangle in Argentina, you get that same type of system. Outside of that, not many borate deposits exist. I won't go into that. You can read that at your leisure. We put out a scoping study at the end of last year. The scoping study talked about progressively moving up to 250,000 tonnes a year of boric acid production. For context, the market's about 4 million tonnes of boric acid equivalent. So we're talking about 1 year's growth in the market. But that would place us as number 3 in terms of global producers of borates. Importantly, the scoping study metrics, coming back to the 3 things I look for. First thing, CapEx, pre-production CapEx, US $98 million. The $98 million gives you the ability to cash flow fund phase 2. The second thing that I look for is margin. We're talking about C1 cost margins of about 66%. And that ends up spitting out phenomenal net present value calculations and IRRs, all based on we believe to be defendable price decks. So we're not ramping a price deck to give you an unrealistic net present value assumption. The resource, it's a multi-generational resource. We have 13.9 million tonnes of contained boric acid. Using an extraction ratio of about 70%, we've got over 8 million tonnes. So the way we look at it is we've got a 30-year operation at 250,000 tonnes a year, or we've got the potential to have a 400,000 tonne a year operation at 20 years. So a multi-generational resource that can tap into this emerging borate market driven by clean tech, driven by electric vehicles and driven by food security. For us, the reason why the CapEx is so low is in-place infrastructure. This is a logistics project. So the fact that we have access to rail, the fact we've got highways, the fact we've got gas, the fact we've got water, the fact we've got labour, all go to forming a low CapEx project. Interestingly, our mining licence that we currently have has the ability for us to put a rail spur into the project if we start getting to volumes where we need rail. Margin, boric acid, depending on where you are, sells from anywhere from $800 to $1,100 a tonne at present. Our assumption in our scoping study was $900 a tonne. As I said, that spits out a margin of about 66%. The technical risk, there's been 1 million pounds of boric acid already produced from the site. In the 1990s, the project was taken through a complete environmental impact process. There is a mining licence on the project. It is a straightforward process that's technically proven. It sits in colmonite. Every day of the week, colmonite is converted to boric acid in Turkey. There's optionality with respect to the project. The resource is large. You can build a small project, a big project, or a medium-sized project. In addition to that, because of the usage of hydrochloric acid, we get to build an SOP operation, which is great. Potassium sulfate, SOP into California, a phenomenal margin opportunity. In addition to that, there's opportunities with byproduct streams of lithium and other potential credits. For me, mining licences in place is now very important, after having gone through challenges with mining licences. The Fort CADY project does have a mining licence. You can Google Fort CADY, you can see the mining licence. We have to reinstate an air quality permit for construction and a water quality permit for the ponds for production. And then we talked about the drivers of the market, but they're all fairly self-explanatory. For us, it's a compressed timeline. We're very much focused on moving the project into construction and then ultimately into production to take advantage of the massive tailwinds associated with borates. Thank you.